Okay, hello everyone. I just started the space and I didn't put any music, which of course people always should do. But we'll ramp it up, I'm sure. Okay, now I'm torn between waiting for more people to join and just getting right into it. I will make some of the co-host in case my phone crashes, I don't know, sometimes during the spaces it often does. Get this board here. We'll add some. Why don't we add Detroit as a co-host if we can? Just because that way, if my phone crashes, it will not nuke the space. Okay, now since we're recording everything, I'll just sort of start. And last week, we had a great space. We didn't have any haters join this week. I personally invited Mr. Hoddle and Sergio Damon Lerner. Now, Sergio wrote this piece, apparently, but I've got to tell you, and I know how this sounds, but you got to just bear with me on this one, which is, I've been reading people critique me and my ideas and what I've been doing, for years and years. Like we're talking like 10 years. And, like at this point, like so many times, people haven't even looked into what I've been doing at all. And I just don't see why I should put more than 2 hours per week, which is these 2 hours. You got 2 hours, but if no one wants to come up and ask anything, then I'll read Sergio's post live on the space and I'll react to it. We'll do it live. Hashtag Bill O'Reilly.gif. So, but yeah, some other random things. Okay, Mr. Hoddle, he was saying, this and that, which is fine. There was back when we were doing the previous spaces, he joined once and then he rattled off like 7 or 8 things. I remember specifically I had to grab a pen and a piece of paper because he was saying so many things. And then we went down the list and then he was like, oh yeah, you were right, Paul. I was wrong. At least a few times. So we can go back to the recording because human memory is very unreliable. But we can go back to the recording. Unfortunately, the recording is also unreliable because sometimes Twitter just deletes them for some reason. But we're going to fix that. We're going to make copies of all these so that doesn't happen again. But Mr. Hoddle was saying that he was saying like the point of BIP 300 is to give Bitmain control of Bitcoin. And I was like, that's not really true. I think that's a misunderstanding of this whole L2, the relationship of 51% hash rate to L2. And I presented this at OpNext, but it goes like this. If 51% hates your L2, the L2 is dead. Okay? And so your L2 has to be friendly with the 51% hash rate. And that's why merge mining is the way to go. And I think this has been misinterpreted as saying because it's true that Drivechain is like a mining-based L2, but it's not true that, okay, listen, we have a chat thing. Does this help? Okay. So it's not true that this is like, I guess it is partially true that it's planned out by me in the sense that every good idea is planned out by me, that every when I wake up in the morning, I only want to do good ideas. So we can go into more details on that if anyone cares. But then he was also saying that this whole project is a scam on VCs. We've told him many times, this isn't how I planned things to go, but it just happens to be the case that we've never really taken any money from VCs. We have 1 or 2 people who are like, they run their own VC fund and they kind of invest as an individual. But mostly this is like OGs, very reputable people and their friends who have invested. And so not that that particularly matters very much, but I think it's very telling that he's just going to say this line about VCs and there's literally no VCs. And we've told him many times, but so does any of that matter? I don't know. Will Sergio show up? Will Mr. Hodl show up? Probably not. There's plenty of other things. I should really start taking a list of like all the stuff that happens through the week. Unless someone wants to raise their hand and come up and ask, or just be a hater. That's encouraged, I guess. But another thing that happened this week was people are finally realizing that RGB is like a bad idea. So the idea behind RGB is like client-side validation, but what it means in practice is that absolutely no objective proof exists that your asset is real. And what that means is that there's no like blockchain, there's no like block explorer where you can say, oh, here's my transaction or here's my whatever. So it's so client side that it just disappears off the earth. And since these are already digital assets, there's no like physical asset. So it's just kind of like ends up being just a little, thing that you just enjoy with your friends. Basically, it's just open timestamps. And it's very hard for you to prove something to someone else unless they run a whole scheme, a whole set of nodes and relay nodes and blockchain with that specific asset. And in particular, that is an issue because one other side effect of that is that if you want to upgrade the whole thing, you can't like upgrade it with a soft fork. You basically can't. This is the same problem with ZK snarks, is that all the blockchain based things, they're kind of loose and they let you just upgrade via the soft fork, but ZK snark, RGB, all this other stuff does not. So yeah, we have various critics. A lot of this stuff I pointed out like 6 or 7 years ago. Another thing that happened was Robin Linus was tweeting about, well, what's so bad about CUSF? And then I don't think CUSF, the Core Untouched soft fork. I don't think anyone gave him any serious answer. Maybe they did, and I didn't see them, but that's because there is nothing wrong with CUSF. It's actually the perfect solution to the problem that the Bitcoin Core developers don't want to take responsibility for soft forks. The problem is really just that we live in a world where very few people understand even the basics. And I don't even think the Bitcoin Core developers understand like what they are doing these days, let alone the miners, let alone most normal people. So even like back in the day, you had like all kinds of people going up on stage and saying that Taproot is like a huge smart contract upgrade for Bitcoin. This was said on stages with cameras rolling. And so yeah, so those are some of my thoughts of the week. And if anyone would like to come up and raise their hand and either hate or love, I suppose, or just comment or just ask a question or just do something else that you might do. But yeah, I'm going to start to take notes throughout the week. I'm going to turn this into like a tiny Bitcoin Uncensored. And I'm just going to take notes on okay, we got some people who want to come up. We got Justin and Iron. I think they were both here last week. Added them up.
Hey, Paul, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Hey, I had a question. Could you elaborate a little bit on the way Bitcoin miners operate today and your view that if nothing changes, how there's, at least my understanding from what you're proposing, there's no incentive for them to be rewarded with the way the system is run now, and what you're proposing with Drivechains and the way the incentives will work with the new eCash hard fork is that they can actually be compensated, rewarded for their work. And if that change doesn't take place, what happens to Bitcoin as we know it today with the way the mining fees work and the way miners are compensated?
Okay, this is like a few different issues. Really good question. This is like a few different issues rolled up into one, though, which is that one of the issues is the security budget, and then the other issue is like, why are we not doing soft forks right now? So I'll get into the second one more because fewer people are talking about this second one, which is like, why can't miners just upgrade via soft fork, or why don't they want to, or what exactly is going on with that? And this is really hard to unpack, honestly. I think very few people understand it. And you really kind of have to take out a piece of paper and start like writing it down. So like, first of all, when people say miners, they mean a couple different things. So there's the mining pools, then there's the individual hashers, the people who actually do the SHA-256 mining. So a lot of the individual hashers, they're not like specialists in Bitcoin, and they don't even consider themselves to be like Bitcoiners per se. They are just people who, they have the data center, they have the cheap electricity, they have access to cheap ASICs somehow. Sometimes in the case of China, they have like an extra advantage because for a while it was difficult to like get money out of China. So back in like 2016 or so, people would mine Bitcoin at a loss just because Bitcoin could leave China, the Chinese mainland, but other forms of capital money could not. So we had that going on. So we have those people are primarily competing against other hashers, and they are trying to get the cheapest electricity and the best cooling. And they're not necessarily concerned, because of the way the difficulty adjusts, they're not even necessarily concerned with what's best for Bitcoin. Of course, they are to some extent, because if Bitcoin goes to zero, their whole investment in ASIC chips will be worthless. Although now, these days, even that is not a very big guardrail or whatever you want to call it, because now a lot of them can pivot to AI. So now a lot of them, like be careful what you wish for. We get a lot of decentralization, but now as a result of this out that they have, they're not as loyal to the Bitcoin project. So you can see already this answer is sprawling into like lots of different territory, because we already said security budget versus why, miner governance. And now even miner governance, you have hashers and pools. Now the hashers mostly compete against each other, and because the difficulty adjusts, even if they increase the price of Bitcoin, after 2 weeks or after enough difficulty adjustments, it will cancel out. And what they really need is a sustainable edge against their rival hashers. So you can see that it's not exactly at the top of their mind. If you have like 1/1,000,000% of the network hash rate, you don't actually care that much, about whether or not we activate, OpCTV or whatever, OpCat or something. Okay, so then we can turn to the pools. The pools are kind of in a weirdly similar situation. On one hand, they are specialists and they do construct the block. So the entire business model of the pool is basically, we run software and we have a brand and we collect a fee. So it's not that difficult to run the pool from a just nuts and bolts perspective. You know what I mean? It's not like SpaceX where you have to build like a giant hangar and you have to get all this fuel and you have to build like a giant tower and you got to like do engineering and stuff. The mining pool is just like a server. It's just the name. It's just Luxor, but it's also a brand. But the mining pools are mostly concerned with, hey, how do we get more people to join our pool and leave like, Foundry and join Luxor? Or how do we get more people to join whatever it is, Ant Pool? And they do their firmware discounts and stuff like that. So again, these people, even though they are specialists and even though they should be more responsible, and they have fewer outs, because if the pool's brand is dead, you can't really sell all that stuff or reuse it. So it's a slightly different situation, but mostly they care about, how do I get people to join my pool and leave the rival pools? And so again, they're not as interested in what's best for Bitcoin per se. They still should be, because they get a percentage-based fee of what the miners get, and so they still should be. But for a variety of reasons, the miners have been trained to not care as much about having an opinion. So during the last block size war, there was this whole do miners control Bitcoin cultural war, and the miners did a bunch of very foolish things. I thought they did SegWit2x and they did all this weird stuff that was very ham-fisted. They could have done small variations of those things, and then they would have done better. But instead, they did this weird other stuff. They got labeled an attack. Then they blockaded SegWit for a long time, a year. Then they were kind of cast out as the enemies. This was a long, long time ago, but a lot of people still care about this. This cultural inertia is still there. So that, I think that's a more interesting question, is like why they won't just save us. Even when people can watch when I was in Vegas recently, I was on the security budget panel, and Nick, the CEO of Luxor, he was on the panel with the rest of us, and I made this joke that people laughed at about, well, hell, Nick, like you are a pool, like just call up your other pool friends, call up Antpool, and you could all just stop doing this. Stop doing this. You guys are doing it to yourselves. Like you could just stop at any time. And he kind of had like a little like embarrassed smile on his face, like because I was kind of right about that. But they've been just trained to just not have an opinion. They care a lot about like, oh, what are other pools doing? So but I think the most important thing to say is that I don't really know why it's so screwed up, but I do know that it is, because I walked front and center. Security budget is a little easier to explain. I'll try to make it a little shorter, but the security budget is how much money we pay to the miners. So it's the total amount of transaction fees paid. This is also how much money the miners get in revenue. It's the same quantity of money. Like if it's $13, it's $13 for them all. And then this is all in equilibrium. This is how much money the miners spend on mining, because they get 13 coming in. If you can spend 12 and get 13, then you would. And the difficulty adjusts, it increases the cost. So it's like buying a $100 bill for $90. It's like auctioning off a briefcase with $1 million in cash. What's the bid? The bidding is going to stop at like $900,999 basically. It depends on what the briefcase is for. So this is the situation in mining, and we want to live in a world where the miners collect a lot of money, because if the miners collect a huge amount of money, they will be loyal to the Bitcoin users and to the Bitcoin network and to the node runners. But if they don't collect a lot of money, then a lot of this proof of work stuff is just kind of a big theater, and it doesn't really do anything. And so it's pointless to have. Why even have proof of work? If the entire security budget is 10 cents per year, and it costs 10 cents to rewrite a year's worth of blocks, this is an extreme case. This is very unlikely. But hopefully you can tell, like, well, if that's the case, then we kind of might as well not even have the proof of work. And if we don't have the proof of work, then what difference does it make if we have the blocks? What difference does it make if we have anything? Okay, now we have Wicked has raised a hand. Hello.
Hey, it might not be that unlikely that you're able to reorg the entire year's worth of blocks with 10 cents on the eCash fork. Okay, but all jokes aside.
Well, it depends on the security budget. Yeah, it depends on this is one another reason why security budget is important, is because it gives you a clue as to how much market demand is there to actually use the network to transact. So it's the clue into whether or not you have real users and real demand.
So I had a question. So I had a real question. So you had said previously that the plan was to drop the difficulty down to 1. Is that still the plan?
I have to say, like, I was not really. It can't actually go to 1, first of all. But what I really meant was not that. So I meant like basically the idea is, because you don't want to like deal with the whole like there's like a CPU era and then there's like a GPU era and then there's like an ASIC era. What I mean is if you have like 12 block eruptors, you could find 10-minute blocks. Like I mean like basically very, very low. I didn't literally mean 1, but that would kind of not even matter. It would just be a really bizarre
first couple of weeks, basically.
Yeah, because it would go up by 4 like several times in a row, because you could find 2016 blocks in like half a second.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did the math, and I was looking. If you had one bitaxe, at difficulty 1, it would take 5 days for the difficulty to stabilize around 70K, and that would be after 17,000 blocks.
Nice.
So that's just with one bitaxe, and then if you have like 100. Then the difficulty stabilizes at about 7 million in 9 days after 25,000 blocks.
I might end up using, if you actually have good numbers on it. I just kind of never bothered to do something like that. But
honestly, you can just ask ChatGPT, and it'll spit out a pretty accurate table, and then you can ask it to give you the code too if you want to actually run the numbers yourself.
Yeah, this AI era is pretty cool. Overall, although there are weird parts about it. But yeah, I think that's
You
that.
probably want to check. I mean, you want to check the underlying code, but yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Trying to convey the idea that we are like out of like, because you can see like, even if it doesn't matter if you have it like on a log scale or an absolute scale, like it will be from the perspective of the current army of SHA-256 ASICs, it'll be like basically like falling all the way down, like, but I didn't really mean like, as you are perfectly aware, there's no reason to go like even further below the like bidax level or something. So yeah, I think like probably like, and block eruptor is like a word from like an earlier time. There used to be these block eruptors they were kind of like fun little novelties, but today the bidax is kind of like the novelty thing. So I think you're right. It's probably, we'll go with something like the 10 bidax level is probably like what it would
be about a million difficulty, which is a nice round number.
So yeah, thank you for that clarification. Sometimes, I'm really torn between, when you try to write something, you're torn between like, okay, I can use one sentence and get like 92% of the way there, or I could like go on and on for like 3 paragraphs, and then it would be like much more accurate, but it would be like really long. And then, yeah, I'm kind of like torn by that sometimes. So every now and then I just say, well, you know what, I got to just go with like the one sentence thing, because the people who are really smart, like I think anyone who really, really, really like knows their stuff, as you clearly do, they would be like, okay, why would he like set it into like the CPU difficulty like era? Like there's no like reason to do that. So
well, I was thinking, I was thinking if you were doing that on purpose, like you had purposefully said you're going to set it to 1 and thought about it. I was thinking in terms of just the memetics of the launch, it would be very crazy for like 2 weeks, and probably the only thing people are talking about is just how quickly blocks are coming in and getting reorged and how chaotic it is. And of course, during those first 2 weeks, no one would be able to transact because there'd be no,
yeah, like an exchange would say like how many confirmations are needed, and they would be like
50,000. Yeah,
exactly.
But again, like.
But here's the thing: is it'd be kind of crazy. I think it'd be crazy anyway. So you don't even get that much more crazy in terms of like human days, right? By setting it lower, you only get like a couple, like 1 extra day of craziness, but in return, it's like many more blocks, many more initial difficulty adjustments. So you don't even really get that. It's not even the marginal craziness is not even that much. It's because, as you were saying, like it's like literally like the first like 1 hour, it will just soar up to like 1 million anyway.
Yeah, I mean, well, not. It would take. Well, it depends on. Obviously, it depends on who's mining. But obviously, like with a lower difficulty, you're not really going to have. There's going to be no for any large miner or person with a handful of ASICs. Let's say we'll classify that as a large eCash miner. At least initially, there's no incentive for them to build off of other people's blocks if they're kind of they have the most hash rate, and it's significantly more than what would cause 10-minute blocks. So let's say you set it at 1 million, which is the equivalent of 10 bit axes, but then someone comes in with like 10 S21s. So now they're effectively coming in with like billions of difficulty. They have no incentive to build off of the other pleb bit axe miners, and they're just going to reorg anything. Like they'll mine for a little while and then publish and reorg anything that had happened prior, right? So I think you run into this problem regardless, and you have to kind of game out, who you think the people who are going to be mining it are going to be. And if it's just going to be BitX miners, then maybe 1 million's good enough. But if you think there's going to be others, you might want to set it higher, but you don't want to set it too high. So I don't know. To think about it a little bit more, probably.
I think it depends on like if you can generate a block faster than it would take you to sync to the tip, then you would just stay with private selfish mining. But otherwise, I think you would just say, well, listen, are there other blocks around? then I have to add them faster. It's like, so if they can mine a block faster than it takes to bring them in, then I would agree it'd be selfish mining. But I think, it exponentially hits. If you're in that scenario, you're finding the blocks very, very quickly. And how long will it take you to find 2016 blocks if that's the case? So you must be able to find.
It's all relative, but you're right.
minutes.
I mean, obviously, the more hash rate you have relative to the initial difficulty, the quicker you're going to then adjust it upwards to the equilibrium. But I think it always takes, like no matter what the initial difficulty is set to, unless you're very, very close to it, it's always going to take a number of days to fully adjust. There's some, I don't know, I need to do the actual mathematics, but there's some logarithmic, a relationship, I think.
Yeah, it's limited to a factor of 4. Although I can't remember how many times it's actually. I think it may have never been.
It only ever hit 4 once, and it was the very first difficulty after GPU mining took off. And it actually hit 4 almost exactly. Like, I mean, so if 4 had not been the limit, it would have been like 4.0 something, but it hit 4. Instead it hit that limit, which I always thought was pretty wild that Satoshi had set that limit and basically nailed it, and we've never gone.
They eyeballed the limit, and the limit was basically the real limit. And then the one time it hit, it was because there was this phase change.
Yeah, and because GPU. I mean, so ASIC was probably a larger phase change long term, but GPU phase change was so intense because there was already so many GPUs out there. So all they had to do was just point them at hashing, which is why it flipped the switch so crazily and actually hit that limit in one adjustment.
And then, I think our whole economy is built on AI GPUs tumbling through text. So even that. Okay, anyone else got anything they want to bring up or say? Or, what also is encouraged is if you see a hater and they don't want to come up here, you can just you can come up and say, oh, this hater said this, what's your reply or whatever. But yeah, what I mean? Like all these years, I've been listening to a lot of haters, and it's like sometimes you give them way too much time. Okay, we got an Andres. We got an Andres with a hand up. Hello.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me all right?
Well, it's not absolutely the easiest to hear you, but I can still understand you, I think.
Okay, so my question is, you were just talking about how miners and hashers and pools are pretty indifferent to increasing the total fee revenue. So my question is, isn't that pretty bad news for Drivechains, since Drivechains relies to some degree on miners caring about keeping every sidechain alive and doing the withdrawals correctly and so on? That's my question.
Okay, it was not super easy to hear you, but I think you were saying something like, okay, Paul, if you're right that miners don't care about their own financial self-interest today, like how will that, isn't that bad news for Drivechain, or what else will happen as a result? Okay, I think it's a kind of a different thing. A lot of things in life are different when they're the status quo. So if you were the first person to propose, so like democracy, and what's another example would be like a financial accounting, like audited financial statements. And I think another example would be like prediction markets, but we're still not through that one. So like, we'll take the example of the audited financial statements where you say, imagine we lived in a world where no one audited the financial statements at all. And then one guy said, hey, I got this idea, what we're going to do is we have these really great financial statements, and we're going to hire someone. We're going to hire Deloitte or whatever, and we're going to hire them to audit our statements and publish a report or something. Well, that would actually kind of look very suspicious at first. So in a world where no one does it, it would be like, oh, why are we calling attention to the fact that we might be untrustworthy? And they would be like, because we live in a world where everyone just pretends like they're honest. So what I'm kind of trying to get at is, well, okay, let me finish my point, which is, in a world where everyone has audited financial statements, it's the reverse. It looks super, super suspicious for you to say, well, here's this thing that we mostly all do. This is the norm. This is the law in many cases, but we're just going to not do it. We're just going to make up our own, whatever numbers. Then that would look more suspicious. And some of what I was getting at with democracy is that, if you lived in a world where everyone had kings and you just said, well, we should have this democracy, and instead of a king, we should just vote on, and then without all this stuff worked out about parties and like ballots and whatever, primaries and nominations and stuff, it would all like just look really weird, and it would fall very flat, and the king would probably just execute you. So it wouldn't work. But if you switch it around and you have a democracy and someone says, oh, we should have a king, and he should just always be in charge, no matter how old or crazy he is, and then we'll have his children be in charge forever, no matter how bad they are. And we'll just do whatever they say. If they just want to kill someone, we'll just do it. So that would not probably work. That's a long-winded answer. But basically, in a world where you have Drivechain, you have most of this revenues coming from the L1 fees, and you have you already live in a world that has all these L2s, where this is like more than half of mining revenues come from the merge mined L2s, which of course I think in the long run it will be like, much more than 99% or even 99.999%. Basically all of the fee revenue can come from the L2s, because in the long run you can take 10 cents out of every transaction. There could be trillion transactions per year. This is going to be hundreds of billions of dollars per year. From the L2s, and then maybe the L1 will have like this tiny, tiny little contribution to that. So it'd be hundreds of billions from the L2, and then like maybe like 50 million or something or less from the L1. In that world, it does look really weird for the people, the miners, to just not care, In that world, it becomes more like neglect.
Can I jump in really quick, because you're actually touching on exactly my question regarding the L2 fees. And it's something that I've been trying to understand, reading a lot of your web publications, but I still haven't really found an answer as to why would a Drivechain pay all of their fees to the L1 miners, regardless of what the fees they're collecting. I just don't understand the economics behind that. So I was hoping maybe as you're talking about L2 fees, you could touch on that.
Well, it has to do with merge mining. So previously, the way merge mining worked, I changed merge mining into blind merge mining with BIP 301. But BIP 301, there was only one guy who was ever like a big hater of BIP 301, and he later changed his mind. And that was, I think, Jay Berg, right? But then he said, oh, no, actually, Paul's right. Or he said, Paul answered my questions or something. He said something like back in 2023. So most people, and now basically including everyone, most people think that, yeah, my modification to merge mining to make it blind merge mining is like basically kosher or basically not a big deal, and basically it does what it says it does. And so that's not controversial. BIP 300, on the other hand, all these people have an opinion about whether or not it's the messiah, savior of Bitcoin, or like the worst thing ever. So just to give you that tiny little bit of context, but the original merge mining was like you'd run a Namecoin node. The Namecoin node, this is an altcoin, co-created by Satoshi, which we've been merge mining on the Bitcoin network since 2011, basically continuously. And the Namecoin node would build a Namecoin block, but it was the Namecoin block was allowed to be built in basically a way that it contained a real BTC block header in it. So I don't know how accessible this explanation is, but basically you had to run the Namecoin node, not the BTC node. But if you ran the Namecoin node, it would give you 2 blocks for the price of 1. So it was a different full node software, and it had to be able to find the Bitcoin full node software. But it wasn't any additional work thermodynamically. So it didn't have to do any extra stuff, because as soon as you found the Bitcoin header, like the 80 bytes that matched the BTC block, you also found a Namecoin block for free. And that's the old merge mining, where it's the one individual miner who is, now you can see in that case, it should be quite obvious. Hopefully it makes sense to you. In that case, the miner is running both nodes. They assemble both blocks. They pay all the transaction fees to themselves in Namecoin NMC and in Bitcoin BTC. So in that case, they get it all. And hopefully that part is pretty clear.
Yeah, no, I get the like the traditional merge mining when you're running both, both daemons, and you're actually doing work on both networks. But with the blind, I like the idea of it. I just don't understand what the incentive would be for a drive chain to with the fees that they've collected and they're now rolling into the into the hash to put on the L1. Why would they give all the fees? Like, why wouldn't I give half the fees and maybe give half the fees back to the network itself? Because the network is still doing their own work. The L1 miners are not doing anything for the drive chain. So you still have to have an incentive for the L2.
But not quite. But you are right. And I had this old thing, I think it was called like F minus C or maybe something. There was a C in the original Fly Merge Mining post, January 2017. You can look it up, the original post where I explain it. And when I was rereading it, I was like, this is a terrible explanation. So unfortunately, the way I wrote the original blind merge mining post in 2017 was like this weird kind of like, I don't know, I was just like talking about issues of the day, and it's a really bizarre explanation. But I think the text of BIP 301 is a lot clearer because I deleted all that and it just says, this is what happens. this, and it's much shorter. But anyway, okay, so the reason is this. Well, now I'm torn because I wanted to explain that part about the C, but I'll get back to it later, minus C. Okay, I'm going to just ignore all that. I'm just going to explain how it works, okay? So the L2, in order for the L2 block to meet its version of the difficulty requirement, okay, so I know this is going to be a weird sentence, but you imagine the L2 blockchain. So like imagine, Thunder or these other L2s, bit names or whatever, or the Z side, which is the privacy L2. You imagine this is its own blockchain and it has blocks and it has nodes, and the nodes are going to check each block to make sure that each block follows all the rules. So you can't steal someone else's money. You can't if the script interpreter throws false or something, that's not allowed. So these are the L2 blocks. Just ignore the L1 blocks for a minute. And you have these L2 blocks. They come in. The L2 software is going to check each of them to make sure that they are right. And one of the things it is going to check is if it meets the equivalent of the difficulty requirement and like the longest chain rule and like that type of thing. And I say the equivalent of because there's no hashing of the block over there. The only thing there is like the Merkle route into the Coinbase transaction on L1. So it's kind of confusing, I know, but the version of the L2 block in the L2 world, like in L1 world, the block has to have enough proof of work. You have to have enough zeros. You have to have hashed on it enough times. But that equivalent check over in the L2 world is the hash of the L2 block in the L1 Coinbase in a very, very specific spot. So there's only one way of getting to that spot, and there's basically like 32 magic bytes. And this is what I call H star. And this is basically the hash of the L2 block. And so the question is, the L1 miners have a total monopoly on that because it's in the L1 Coinbase. So you need them. Without them, you cannot find the L2 block. But the blind part just says, let's separate the node cost out. And basically it says, and the original language was better because it had this bribe language, which I really thought was a great language, but I removed it for some reason. But there's the bribe, and then there's the accept the bribe. So the bribe is basically someone pays the miners on L1 in an normal L1 transaction somewhere else in the body of the block. They say, I'll pay you this bucket of coins if you set the 32 bytes H star to what I want you to set it to, and then the miner just says, sure, why not? And the way BIP 301 works is the miners can basically only take one of those bribes. So it becomes like a bidding situation. And then it's like auctioning off a briefcase where you have $1 million in the briefcase, and then the people just bid until it gets to 9. It could not go to $1 million, but basically it would, because
But
as long as
my question about the bribing and the you just mentioned something I am a little confused about. You said only one bribe per block. Is that one per drive chain, or is that for the entire?
yes, per L1 block per sidechain also. So there's like could be 256 or something.
Correct. So what I'm saying is that are the drive chains competing with each other?
No, only the block within its category. So there's like, it breaks the L1 Coinbase into like a special structure, and then there's like, here's where all the blind merge mining parts are, and then here's like slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, slot 4, slot 5. So like Z side would be like in slot 5 or something, and it's only competing with the candidate blocks. And
okay, but so every all 256 drive chains can be submitted into the same block. Is that correct?
Yeah, the same L1 block, and then they all advance at the same time. And you notice if you check our block explorer, they all have every L2 block has the exact same timestamp as an L1 block. So usually when one L1 block is found, they all have the exact same timestamp. That is because you literally find them all at the exact same moment.
So then just to wrap up that, because I do have one really other quick question, but just to wrap this up. So then just in terms of like the math behind it, because 256 possible L2s does not fill the L1 block. So what I'm suggesting is that you're going to be, looking at a lot of, I guess, non-competing space, because you're only going to be dealing with like regular L1 transactions, which are not going to have very high fees. So in my view, the 256 side chains won't really need to compete very, very much in terms of the fees to win, unless they're competing within.
They have to compete against each other. So the other part of the idea,
just themselves.
So
okay.
The idea is this: imagine there's only one side chain, just to simplify it for a moment, and then let's just call it. But as long as there's two different people running a full node of the L2 sidechain, and actually this requirement is really not a very, even though it's, first of all, it's a very easy bar to clear, but second of all, it's kind of like, how would a blockchain even work if there was only one full node? It's like very unclear, like what exactly would be happening there. But anyway, someone has to be running the full nodes, and as long as there's two rivalrous people running the full nodes, what each of those people does is their software is automatically, they turn on like virtual mining or blind merge mining, like they kind of like turn it on, and they have like the thing like refresh occasionally. They are assembling a block that pays themselves so you can call them A and B, Mr. A and Mrs. B, or whatever, Alice and Bob. Those are both people who, when Alice's full node is saying, oh, I collect all these fees, I collect all these transactions into the L2 block, into the L2 Coinbase, Alice pays Alice. And then Bob is doing the same thing, but in the L2 Coinbase, Bob is paying Bob. Alice and Bob both also have L1 coins on L1. So since they're the same person, they're the bridge. Since it's the same human being, it's like this is the bridge back that the information like kind of flows through. So Alice says, listen, this L2 block is worth whatever, $1,000 worth of fees, or $1 million or $1 billion, whatever, doesn't matter. Let's just say it's 1,000. This L2 block I'm getting right now, if I get my H star in the L1, if I get that, it's worth $1,000 to me of L2 coins. I'll pay $990 on L1, and I eke out a tiny little ROI. Now, this ROI should be commensurate. This is the C point. Before this minus C, it was like fees minus C or V minus C. I think it was V minus C because it was value of the block minus the cost. The cost is, first of all, that running the full node might be expensive, and maybe not a lot of people want to do it. So first of all, they got to pay for that. although you're only running it for like 10 minutes, so you have to like amortize that. So that should be pretty low in theory. But so you have that might be the cost, but then also the L2 coins are a little bit flakier than the L1 coins. The L1 coins are like the real deal, unencumbered coins, which the L2 coins might be. You know, you never know. So it might not be 100% literally. But the point is, it is an auction where it's like a briefcase that has $1 million worth of cash or $1,000 worth of cash in our case. And so, and then as long as there's two people bidding, it's not incentive compatible to just imagine that someone is going to say, oh, I'll give $500 for it. Meanwhile, right next to you is a full node that could say, well, listen, I have the exact same mempool. I have the exact same next candidate block that's paying $1,000. And over on L1, they're selling basically access to create it for $500, $501. So that would basically just not happen, I think, in equilibrium.
I just want to make one point that I think it might be fair to assume that there might be a case where there is only one miner. If you look at like how the EVMs use their sequencers, you can kind of think of a sequencer as like a single mining node because they're in charge of the entire L2. So you could have like a single node that would do all the work for the L2 and then report it back to the L1. But I have one other question. If you could maybe I think it's a quick answer, but just for like a new proposal for an L2, I just wanted to confirm that it does in fact require a Coinbase from the L1, and I think practically speaking that would almost require the cooperation of a mining pool on the L1, and I just wanted to get some clarification on that.
You're referring to creating a new
sidechain.
L2. Yes. Yeah. So part of the idea behind that is that you would want them to be like aware of what they have allowed. Of course, it doesn't really cost them much to support a new L2. But yeah, you don't want people just kind of like spamming the system. The idea of how the timeline would work would be something like people come up with this L2, people discuss it amongst themselves. Maybe they code it, they make the example of it. They're kind of ready, they test it. They're ready to kind of give it a try. Then what they would do is they would kind of like, there are a lot of ways of, in a totally decentralized way, bringing it to everyone's attention. So I don't know if these are necessary or not, but you could you make like a project site for the new L2, and then you say, here's the software. And then you could maybe broadcast like a high value op return or something. This is in the extreme case where, we all live in bunkers because the government has tried to destroy all cryptocurrency research and all cryptocurrency advocates. But yeah, you would like broadcast this high value op return, just like let everyone know, oh, listen, there's this new L2. And then basically the idea is it doesn't cost miners that much. It basically only costs their attention to support the L2. And so if they give it their attention, then they should give it a try with the slot. And the slots are not, they're not really scarce in any real sense. So
it comes down to like a bribe in the op returns, what you're saying. I was just curious as to like how like the actual procedure to make the proposal. How
that's a very good question. It depends on because again, what I would think the equilibrium would actually be is, but I've been wrong before, but what I would think the equilibrium would actually be is the large miners would be making so much money from L2s that they would, it's kind of like how Marathon has like, Mara research or something, and they do stuff like, forgot it already, but Enduro, right? Stuff like that. And so I would think they would actually be like kind of like have their finger on the pulse of it a little bit, and they would even be paying for a lot of it. But in the bunker world where we're all trapped underground and, the Terminator robots are trying to kill us all on the surface, that would be like how you would get their attention if they weren't already paying attention. So that was like the timeline.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted to know. So I appreciate your your time, making time to engage with the community, in real time like this, because this is important. But also, like, if I wanted to join like the community, I'm not on Telegram. Is there any other communities out there, like Discord or anything like that?
Yeah, we actually had made a few, but they're like we just like made them and they're kind of hollow right now. But we will be beefing them up, and then there will be more. But yeah, we're most active on Telegram right now. But we'll get back to you with that stuff. We're starting on kind of all that up like this week.
Perfect.
So
I appreciate it again. Thanks again for your time.
thanks.
So I had a easy question, and then I have a more in-depth question on the bit assets layer 2 namespace. Let's assume that BIP 300 gets activated in the future on Bitcoin. Would you be able to bring the compatible layer 2, like from that are mined or created, or the different ordinals or whatever sidechains
This is a wild question.
over to Bitcoin?
I didn't know where you were going with this, but now I think I figured out. Okay, so there's a couple things that I think everyone in the audience might find interesting, which is, first of all, just talking about doing the R&D on the software, just like making software. Like if we change the bit asset software and we make it easier to use, like it has a better user experience, or we change the colors, or we add more multi-sig, or we add whatever, we add more features. Any chain that activates BIP 300, they can just start using like the latest version of all of the L2s. So like, let's say Litecoin activates BIP 300. Let's say eCash shows up and we do R&D on the L2s. We've been using them for like a year or whatever, 90, whatever days, or a year and a half, whatever, what have you. And now, like, we kind of worked out a bunch of bugs or something, and then Litecoin activates BIP 300 later. Like, they just can grab the whole suite, they can just grab all the L2s, latest version of the software, and kind of start using them if they want. Now, what you asked was a kind of even more interesting question, which is basically something like, if you had the whole bit assets history of like people making assets, and you had some kind of like, like a snapshot, like a UTXO asset snapshot, can you make it so that when you turn on the bit asset sidechain in BTC world or on Litecoin or wherever, on Dogecoin or whatever, whenever people activate BIP 300, when they get around to it, which they almost certainly will, because all the smartest people are huge BIP 300 fans, and it is just a counter to 13,000. And so I think, I actually think it's kind of likely that over time people will just like, it'll be like BIP 39, I think, at one point. But the point is, when years down the road, a different chain, for example, BTC, activates BIP 300, can they just like say, okay, all the assets created until now, which now would be like, let's just say now is hypothetically like the year 2029, and it's like February 3rd or something. So that's when they activate. But they could just say, well, wait a minute, let's have the exact same chain of assets. I'm pretty sure that is possible. I don't see why it wouldn't be. It might be a little weird. You might have to like build in like a weird like
would they be
might be like,
would they be burned on one chain and go to the other?
no, they would still exist on both. They would exist on both. And then it would kind of be like hard forking the L2, so that you have the same assets with like Litecoin as the base and eCash as the base and BTC as the base. It would be like three, it would split into three, which is very interesting possibility to think about. And that's also true for the names. So any independent asset, like the bit names, I think you should be able to do it for bit assets and bit names. So wacky idea.
And then that brings up a second question, that let's say the mining or the creation of a bit asset, a bit name or bit asset, or any of these other real world assets, whatever you want to call them.
They're very similar. So either one.
They benefit the layer 1. the fees of the creation of that asset comes to the layer 1 eCash, but what about if it was created on another layer 1? Would that be sort of stealing those fees from eCash, or that's like another problem down the road?
Well, now you have to walk me through exactly what scenario you're trying to talk about. So it's like eCash shows up. We activate bit assets on eCash. Someone creates like a funny asset, like, I don't know, SpaceX common stock or something, the asset. And then people are trading it. They're earning fees. Now there's like maybe a million, like Elon creates like Elon coin or something, but on bit assets. And hypothetically. And so then people have been playing with it for years. So now there's like, 73,000 people worldwide that own like different amounts of Elon coin. This is on eCash. Elon coin on bit assets on eCash. Say that 5 times fast. But then now BTC activates BIP 300. It imports it adds bit assets. It adds a version of bit assets that like imports the snapshot history. So now, I'm not sure exactly if you're saying you would replay literally every transaction that happened on bit asset. I don't think you would do that because you wouldn't have the same deposits and withdrawals. But you could say the 73,000 people that each own different amounts of Elon coin on bit assets on BTC, those people would still have their Elon coin. And then when they make transactions, it would be on that L2, and they would go to the L1 miners of BTC over there, and the history could diverge. So I don't know if I'm getting any closer to answering your question or not. But
I think maybe I misunderstood. I think I misunderstood that the creation of the asset on that side chain doesn't. What does that use? Does it use coins on that side chain or on the
the way I have it set up, you could design L2 with any ideas, good or bad, but the ones that where I have it set it up now is for bit assets, you have to pay transaction fees in the underlying currency in order to use it. So for example, eCash shows up, bit assets activates as the L2 Drivechain of eCash. Then you have to deposit some coins in eCash over there, like whatever, a few. And then you make more assets. You spend like as a transaction fee, you spend like 10 cents or 50 cents worth of eCash, and then you make like a 100 million Elon coin or whatever. And it's just like a whole like a pump.fun over there or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, I see. And then my other question, the more detailed one was, I asked Andrew, he's the creator of the Spaces protocol, which is a decentralized namespace that exists today on Bitcoin. He said that I asked him about bit assets, and he said he looked at it. He's not excited that it relies on a side chain or that existing DNS namespaces seems to be reserved for existing holders, but he does like that people are discussing this.
I think you might have been talking about bit names, because bit names, I have the ICANN reservation, and that's very important, I think, because we need to do that because we have to somehow, basically that's also an attempt to like hard fork the ICANN database. So it's like, there's a situation where Google owns Google.com, and they're not going to appreciate it if we try to say, oh, let's all like, hey, there's this new thing and it's better. But they'll be like, oh, I have to buy Google.com again, or I have to buy it. That's just not going to work for them, and they're just going to shrug, and they're just going to say, well, this is a stupid idea, and it's so stupid, I'm not even going to give it any more of my attention. So we have to protect the existing property rights to names. I think that's a really, really good idea. It's part of my idea, and I think that's very, very strong part of the idea is keeping. That's what will make people think, we can tell people, listen, this Google.com is going to be waiting for you over in our thing for as long as you want. You can wait a long time, and it'll be waiting for you over there. And this is important because we want people to like be able to slowly research the issue, and then they'll see why the bitnames is superior to ICANN, but ICANN has a very, very, very powerful network effect, which, we should all respect. And, they created all this stuff, but, bitnames like doesn't require you to like pay annual fees. Like it doesn't require you to pay. Well, I guess it doesn't really happen anymore, but they used to have to like pay to have like HTTPS and stuff, like weird stuff like that. But more importantly, like with, Satoshi had to register the Bitcoin domains, like, he had to somehow pay for that with fiat. But with this, you pay with crypto, you can pay anonymously, you can put stuff in multi-sig transactions, you can have complicated ownership conditions, and you have a total property right. Like one thing is that the government can seize the names. Sometimes, don't you remember, like you'd visit like, I don't remember what it was, like Napster and like other stuff, and it would be like, whatever, FBI, this site has been seized. They have like the big seized thing. And they did that for Silk Road as well. They're like, this hidden site that's been seized. They have like the thing, the notice they put up. But it's not possible to seize someone's without the private key. Of course, you could always arrest the person and hold a gun to their head and say, give me the private key or I'll kill you now. And that would probably be pretty persuasive. But if they can't do that, then, they can't actually seize the site. And this is a springboard into everything. Because like we live in a world already where you have multiple different accounts, like big people. They have, here's my Twitter, here's my YouTube, here's my TikTok, here's my Instagram, here's whatever. You go down the line. And so we already live in a world where you have to have like Linktree and you have to have all this stuff. And so I think that we want to, if we can bring people into a new world, we want to try to do that. But we're not going to be able to do that if we don't respect Google.com, Facebook.com, all the other random people who they don't have time to look into our weird project, and they're registering their new thing that they think is going to be the next big thing, X.com or whatever. So we have to respect the ICANN property right. I think that's a very, very important idea that's necessary.
So I guess maybe just one more question is that on the bit names that sorry, I lost my train of thought. You have another question?
Okay, it happens.
Oh yeah. If we have compatibility between all these different naming systems, it's not necessary to have it right out of the gate. I think that's it. Would you say like but some kind of compatibility between Namecoin, bit names, spaces, the other one is like Handshake, domains.
A lot of these are good, and I applaud the effort, but I think we can't get in the business of supporting too many of them, unfortunately. And I think everyone who got involved, my guess is that Bitnames is in the same situation as Handshake, where everyone who gets involved knows that you are trying an experimental new thing that might not work and probably won't work, because most new ideas fail, most startups fail. So I think we have my thinking on it, but I'm open to being persuaded of something else. But my thinking on it is it's mandatory to respect the ICANN names. We also want to have everything in the Bitnames system that's new, and that the other stuff is maybe like how big is Handshake really? Like, even though I've been aware of it for a long time, and I know some people in the real world who are big fans of it, I personally have never ever actually used it to like visit a website. As far as I know, I don't have like the browser extension or however. I have a very little familiarity with even how it works, even though I know some people in the real world who are into it. So I think we gotta make sure that we cut all those things. But hopefully those people, anyone excited about new domain name systems would pile into this one as well, or at least give it a little bit of attention. I would definitely be open if I learned like there's this huge community of like secret Tor websites all being run by Handshake, then maybe I would think, okay, we can just support that also. But my current thinking is that it would be just ICANN and just new bit names. But it's possible we could support like all of them also. Like, it depends on how difficult it is.
And then I guess a tangent also on that is that there's people working on decentralized identity, making things like PGP compatible with Nostr secret, the Nostr private keys. But I guess those could be also just a sidechain, just a Nostr.
That's not even better. I think actually it's a
Sidechain.
very good question. My view is that bit names could drive the whole thing. So your bit name, like I was saying with Linktree, you'd have this one bit name, and the bit name could have like, a IP4 address. It could have your Nostr public key. It could have the reusable payment code. It could have your reusable Z side privacy address. All 100% of these things. It could have your phone number. It could have your like a hash of your medical information. It could have basically everything could be behind the name, and it could just be like a JSON kind of lookup situation where it's just like they're all like basically TXT records or something like that. There'd be like these records, and you would just update them behind. So you'd own the name. You'd buy the name first. You'd buy Justin. It automatically gives you like, like a public key and like a number. I have like a phone number type thing in there now where it's like an 8-digit phone number. So this is also so that you can give people your number at a bar. Is kind of what I was thinking, because there's a lot of people named Muhammad and stuff. There's a lot of stuff you got to think about when you do this name thing. It's kind of a tough nut to crack. But you buy the name first, and so you own like Justin.bit or Justin.whatever, because the way I set it up is as long as it's not an ICANN name, it clicks over to the new system. So it'd be Justin.anarchy or whatever you want to do. Justin.faith. And so you would own that, and you'd have a number, 8-digit number for the name. And then from there, you could set up anything. You could put the PGP key there. You could put Nostr there. You could put just whatever you want there. Just put everything there. Telegram screen name, your X screen name, your Instagram, so that it would be like a Linktree type of a situation. That's the idea. Okay, so we had other people who tried to come up, and then they politely didn't say anything. So what about Shomari? Came up earlier.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I have one more short question, and then this will be my last one, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
Is there a limit? Like, can you have? You've mentioned before you can have a layer 2 and you can have a layer 3 with a drive chain based on the layer 2. Is there like a limit there to like? Can you only have layer 8, or you're not?
No, but it does become progressively more bizarre, because as you cut it up, you run into the security budget problem where it's like, how easy is it to just rewrite? It depends on how much fees are on the whole thing. So chopping it up is not great. And then there's 256 layer 2s. From layer 1 to layer 2 is 256. But you could add more. But actually, there is some limit, like in a practical sense, because you like the human level of attention, like how much attention can you give to these chains, and in particular whether or not like they are malfunctioning, and in particular whether or not the withdrawals coming back. There's only one withdrawal bundle every few months coming back, but if there's going to be like 8,000 and they all malfunction at once, I don't know how the system would survive that. It might, because they're all very slow on purpose. But yeah, the 256. But just in practice, I just don't think there will be so many. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Where do you see like an everyday, like a coffee purchase? Where do you see that happening, on layer 2?
Yeah, I think layer 2 is fine, because I have already published. You can read my post on that I call Thunder. And actually, you can look at the tests that we did for our performance contest last year. And it's possible with because the Thunder, the way I imagine that, it'd be like 14 or 15 different L2s. They're mostly the same software, but they're just like, this is the L2 that you use in like North America. So it'd be like US, Canada, Mexico. And then there'd be like a different L2 that you use in like Southeast Asia, It'd be like, I'm not sure exactly how it'll all shake out, but then there would be like Western Europe, and then there might be like Eastern Central Europe, Eurasia or something like that type of thing, Middle East, and then they would be like geographically distributed, and there might be like an Oceania one or something like that. So if you do that, you can get to like something like maybe you can get to like I have the exact math like on the site and on the GitHub tests and in various blog posts, but you can get to something like 50% of the Earth's transaction rate, and that comes out to like 3 trillion transactions per year or something like that. So you can already hit that, and that's just with the software we have now. I'm certain that you could massively improve that if you threw a little bit of time and effort into it. And of course, you could always have like 28 L2s instead of. So I think at first it would be expanding horizontally to fill you just reuse the L2. And of course, at first there would just be one of these large block L2s. There'd be small block L1, large block L2. Eventually, the large block L2 would fill up, and people would say, well, we need a second one. And the people who switch to the second one, they would be like the most desperate new people, like the poor people of all the existing users. And so then that would kind of just naturally cleave off a new group, because there would be all these people who say, well, it's getting too expensive, so use such and such net. This is exactly what has happened, by the way, with Ethereum, whereas like you had Ethereum and then people were like, well, what was the first, like the early ones, you had like whatever, Polkadot or whatever the hell that stuff was called. But the point is, you had EVM and then you had other stuff, Avalanche, whatever. Other EVM type stuff was being made. This was basically just additional EVM block space. So this is kind of exactly what I'm describing, where I'm not sure, like, how important do you think it was, like, that Solana has all these inventions or whatever, versus just it had more EVM block space? And that's kind of what I'm talking about, is you'd have one large block, L2, that's in an analogous case to Ethereum to BTC ratio. It would fill up, then there'd be like a Solana type thunder, there'd be like Solana, giant thunder, and then there'd be like a bunch of other smaller ones. There would be Base, and there would be whatever, Tron, and all that other stuff, whose name I can't even remember at this point. But there were many of those little EVM chains in between. Can't remember their names, but but they were there. And so that's what I'm talking about. All right, Justin, you already said you had the last question like 2 or 3 times. Now we have to go to another person.
Well, really quick, I did have one other concern. As you're just being very open about all the upcoming plans. What are you guys expecting in terms of infrastructure for eCash, like API access for builders specifically looking to build on top of the network? What are your plans there?
Well, of course, we have some existing software that you can try.
I downloaded the Bit window, I think it was called.
Yes, and that Bit window will download the L2s if you go to the sidechains tab, and then those are the full nodes themselves. So those RPCs, that kind of would be either what you would use, or someone would maybe turn those into.
Okay, that's specifically my question. Are you like layer 2 labs? Are you taking responsibility for providing any sort of infrastructure for builders on specifically the L2s that you're deploying? So not like new proposals, but like Thunder. If I wanted to build on top of Thunder, where would I go to get like documentation on how to do that?
Yeah, we will be putting that type of stuff out. So stay tuned, I suppose. But of course, you can download it now, and you can, there's
I see how it would work, but again, like someone would have to do that, and that would be a tremendous, undertaking. Infrastructure is costly. It's not a one-time cost; it's ongoing. So, I just, this is a big deal, I think, in general. So I just was wondering if you guys had, spent time working that out in terms of how you would provide infrastructure once the network
Well,
goes
what do you
live.
mean by infrastructure? You mean like the full node?
Specifically, like API. So I'm thinking like with Ethereum, they had Infura when it first launched, and Infura was free. And every builder that wanted to experiment could just, get an API key and then just connect to their infrastructure. So from a builder's perspective, not like from a node, because nodes don't that's not how you build web apps and things like that. You need like indexers and things on top of the node. So I wasn't sure if those things were being built or if they were, planned or what the situation was. But someone has to at some point provide, tools and infrastructure if you're going to actually want to build applications on top of these L2s.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. Of course, you understand that under the hood, what Infura is just they ran the full node and then they exposed, they basically said, we will run the full node. So you understand that right now we specialize just in making the full node work as well as it can work. And there's going to be an infinite road. If I'm right, there's going to be an infinitely long road of people who either run the node themselves or they run the node on behalf of someone else. Like you could start the Infura. You probably wouldn't need an Infura right now because the full node cost is so cheap, actually. So
let me give you like a specific example, like for a mobile wallet for this eCash community, you would need the ability to be able to connect to remotely to these individual L2s. Like I'm thinking like a multi-chain wallet specifically. So like if you had a wallet that you would download from the App Store, you would expect it to be able to connect to Thunder and Zside and these initial L2s right out of the gate. And I think that should happen. There should be a mobile wallet that is very accessible to the average person. They shouldn't have to download Bitwindow to have their first experience. In my opinion, their first experience should be a
I
mobile
completely
experience.
agree. No, you're 100% correct.
I'm just thinking like how do you facilitate getting a mobile wallet to manage these multiple L2s, and that's what I'm thinking of.
It's kind of rudimentary, but we have this one called Red Wallet, and it's but yeah, you're right. But we, like we're doing all this work at each different layer, so we want to specialize in the full node layer. Do you understand what I mean? Because if we do our job really, really well, then it's very, very easy. We're talking like 1 day or less for someone to start up eCash Infura or something, because they know that we are doing our job to make the full node software work. So they can just grab it from us, and then they can specialize in that leg of the. But there will be the stack will be, I think, in the long run, the stack is like infinitely high. So in the long run, you have like electrical cables in the ground, you have power plants, and then you have like data connections, and you have session connections, and then you have applications, but then you have applications on applications. So eventually there'll be people after you build the multi-chain wallet, there'll be someone else who's just like, okay, listen, I want to build like a game or something, and I just want to use the multi-coin wallet. So eventually the stack will just, it'll go up and up and up forever. But this is where we are right now.
You mentioned it specifically, for you is because I think it's important as to who runs that infrastructure as well. With Infura, it was a Consensus, Joe Lubin's company, and he was just infinitely funded. So there was no issue of like runway or anything like that. It just happened. It worked. Like there was no issues. And I think that's important, like, for, again, first impression, when you're trying to attract new builders to this new community, you just want everything to work. You want friction to be at its absolute lowest. And if you just have like volunteers running your infrastructure, I've seen what happens with that. That's like, Bitcoin Cash community, where it's just like, it's all volunteers and it's not reliable. And it's very frustrating for the builders. So it's nice when you have like a central organization that takes responsibility. Maybe there'll be like a service level agreement, something that there's someone taking responsibility and brings confidence to the people that want to now invest their time and energy to build on top of this. So I'm just, throwing out some of
I
the things that
completely
I've
agree.
seen
No, I think you're 100% right.
cause issues in the past of the networks.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and it does help when there's like a trusted brand that takes responsibility for the. I think that's very, very, very important. In the case of Infura, I think it had many extremely negative side effects also, because it was like Infura will just pay for everything. So then you had a situation where no one is running full nodes, and then you're in a political situation where very few people cared about how expensive the full node got. And that shifted the whole Ethereum community. It may have doomed the whole Ethereum community in the sense of it then invited the creation of like Solana and all this other stuff where they said, well, okay, you guys don't care about how expensive the Ethereum node is. Now we double don't care in Solana. Like we care even less. And now we have even more block space. So it kind of created a little bit of a race to the bottom.
Yeah, you're 100% correct in everything that you just said. There were pros and cons for sure. I think we should, just revisit the pros and try to minimize, the cons. But just the win for Infura was that they attracted like the bulk share of the development community, the builders. So when it comes to building, EVM has the, if I'm comparing it to like UTXO, EVM has all the builders, because they had the infrastructure that just worked. But there were side effects, of course. Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, I think you're very right to call attention to that. So thanks. Okay, Mr. Fall at D, whose icon is a giant bee, which is interesting if you think about that. His icon is a huge bee, but his screen name is Fall at D. Hello. Oh, but I cannot hear him. He is muted. Strong silent type. Don't hear him, but maybe we'll get back to him. Anyone else? I mean, we can keep talking about Infura. I think the Infura thing is very, very, very interesting because, yes, it attracted all these builders. Shamari is 100% right. It created an environment that was very different from Bitcoin. I don't know. It's going to take like a team of historians to rip it all apart to figure out like exactly what happened, because Ethereum has more fee-paying users than BTC, so they have achieved a level of product market fit that is arguably objectively superior. If you go to like cryptofees.info, the website, they have more users. And the EVM was clearly something that people liked because all these different chains, they were totally different from each other at first, but then they all became EVM compatible. This became a phrase that everyone used. But then the question is this: if not a lot of people are caring about how expensive it is to run a full node, it creates huge amounts of political pressure to just keep piling everything in. And then it's unclear how you get back from that. Like, even maybe that's not so bad, but you are painting yourself into a corner. And so you have to think very carefully about. I think it's smart to try really to fight really hard to keep the full node cost down, which in that way I agree with people like Luke Dash Jr. and the small blockers, because it's very easy to have a crutch and just say, we don't need to, everything will be fine. It's very easy to do that. And then, it's kind of like a Mickey Mouse when he programs the broom to carry the water, and then you might find yourself really in trouble, and now you may regret what has happened. And I think someone in the ecosystem should always be fighting to keep the node really easy to run, really cheap. At the same time, one thing I really always disagreed with Luke about, Luke never seemed to buy this idea of ramping things up. I disagreed with this for years. I remember, I think at Scaling Bitcoin 1, I was talking to him about this. And it goes something like this, where it was like, okay, Luke, sure, we want everyone to run a full node. But what about the people who just heard about Bitcoin like yesterday? Like, we're going to ask them to run a full node like immediately. Can't we ramp them up? You know what I mean? Maybe they can have like Bitcoin Lite. They can have Bitcoin SPV. They could have whatever, like the Infura type thing at first. And of course, many users are very different. So, people have different needs. And so does everyone really need, is it one size fits all? And shouldn't we have the easy node, the SPV? So I was always a huge fan of SPV. I'm very pro SPV. Ironically, though, the other people who are pro SPV were the large blockers, and I thought they consistently misinterpreted SPV. And I wrote a tiny essay about that, where SPV, it allows you to safely free ride off of someone else's full node, just like Infura. But the problem with this is similar to what I mentioned, is when it's too easy to free ride, now you might, like, you're blind. You have the Novocaine is blocking you from you're blinding you to the reality of what's really happening, and that I think is dangerous. So the fact that SPV works so well, that kind of means you should like pay it forward, and you should be like helping finance full node, development or something. You should be kind of cutting back across to say, wow, I'm so, it's like you're a super poor, you're like a poor orphan, and they give you the scholarship to go to the private school, and then you hit it rich. You should go back and should pay more money back into the thing donate back to the school that you were free riding off of. You should not be just hitting the gas and saying, this is like what the Bitcoin SV people say, is they just say, oh, just everything can just be SPV. And it's, that's not true. Everyone can't be a free rider. So, but yes, I don't know. Anyone else got anything they want to say? I can use this time to read. And I like Sergio. Sergio's great. There's a very important philosophical disagreement between me and other Bitcoiners, which is that I don't think they realize, I don't think these other Bitcoiners realize how screwed up everything is in BTC. And so a lot of people think, oh, everything's fine. We'll activate some soft forks next year. Oh, we have more people requesting. Let me see. There we go. Everyone's saying, oh, everything's like fine, and soft fork activation isn't broken, or just everything's going great. We have a lot of adoption, and but I've been around a long time, and I got a lot of friends who are insiders. Okay, now we have a new decentralized. That's a funny name.
Yeah. It's a modern update from decentralized to get with the times,
It's definitely fits the last couple of years.
Yeah, it used to be decentralized, but then everyone became retarded, so I had to lock in. But basically, I was going to ask, so you're duplicating all the UTXOs, which means all of our ordinals are getting duplicated too, and there's nothing you can really do about that if I start an indexer, right? So couldn't I just, with your small blocks, couldn't I just fuck your life up, Paul, by just incentivizing ordinals, no matter how many fees you add on top of it? Because that's where all the Bitcoin users are. Is all these people down here don't use Bitcoin anymore. They're all faking it. They're on Solana. They're all fucking retards, But us ordinals people, we use Bitcoin every single day, all day long. And you're not going to be able to stop us when you duplicate our ordinals onto your chain. So what's your plan for that?
Well, I think you may have misunderstood. I'm pro ordinals, and I'm pro usage of the chain, and I'm pro anyone who pays transaction fees. So I always said this about the ordinal people, which are that, thank God we have some users.
Yeah,
so
right.
In 2023, I was saying, well, at least someone's using the chain. And in fact, the ordinal people, they were like the dose of reality. I was watching recently this the Scientology documentary where this crazy lady's in a cult, of course, Scientology. No, I mean, no offense to the Scientologist people, but I was watching this documentary or whatever. But this lady is there, and she has like a tiny baby, and she's pregnant or something, and she's like working like 30-hour days or something, or it's like 30 hours of work, 3 hours of sleep, like scrubbing. She's cleaning or doing something crazy because you're in a cult and you're brainwashed. And then finally, she looks at her baby and she realizes, oh, I have to get out of here, and she plans her heroic escape. And what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Ordinals people shined a light on how like broken everything was with like Lightning Network and stuff. Because the Ordinals people started to use the chain, the fee rate went up a little bit, and then it's like in Lightning, if the fee rate is too high, you have to do uncooperative close, or even if people just disagree on what the fee rate is, it's uncooperative close. And then all the Lightning people got angry at the Ordinals people, but I was like, no, the Ordinals people they've shined a light, so they're like the baby in this metaphor or something. They woke everyone up to like how stupid all this stupid Lightning crap is. It doesn't work at all. It's the tiniest little bit of usage of L1. Now the small blocks refers to the plan to shrink the eCash, make eCash should be basically identical to L1. But I was thinking the long run equilibrium block size would be smaller.
Mm-hmm.
That's the plan. And that's just to like encourage people to, because I think in the real world, in a realistic scenario, most people would transact on L2 and not even leave L2. And they don't even, people would maybe have their retirement savings on L1. But if that's the level of usage you're talking about, the current L1 usage is like, it's like whatever, like 2,500 transactions every 10 minutes or something. And that's just a lot. That's honestly a lot. So we just don't need that.
I think it maxes out at 4,000 right now. So that's kind of the issue, is that 4,000 is nothing. You can get a BRC20 mint that has 200,000 mints. And next thing you know, the fee rate is 20x for an hour for no good reason at all, other than 300 Chinese degens submitted 2,000 transactions a pop. 300 people made that happen. That was it, right? So I think what's with this situation, like you probably need a way to like be Ordinals aware from day one, and then force those people to like get onto a drive chain or something, right? Like that would make sense to me. But what I'm thinking is, if you're duplicating everything, we're gonna have all of our Ordinals day one. Like you're duplicating all my Bitcoin puppets, everything. So there is gonna be plenty of incentive for Ordinals people to come give you a headache and do the things you don't want them to do. I mean,
you say give a headache, but that's just you guys are fee-paying users. You guys are customers, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's fair.
This is what I never understood about all the Ordinals.
Are going to be upset. Your other users are going to be like, "What the hell?" Like these dumbasses down below, like Mr. Hodl, who wants to come up here and argue, but he can't because Vlad blocked him. These kind of people are going to give you a headache, even though they're not using your chain, simply because you airdropped them some eCash.
Mr. Hodl,
because of us.
I invited Mr. Hodl. I tagged him.
I think he's blocked by the co-host, so he can't.
Oh, yeah.
Vlad, are you able to unblock Mr. Hodl?
I'll just take Vlad off co-host for like 10 minutes and it'll let him up.
You can reblock him after this.
It's very
I had a question about your
person.
For your client, like your client that's going to come out whenever you launch the hard fork for eCash. Are you going to build the poker client in eCash core, like the remnants of the poker client were in Satoshi's original core implementation? Just wanted to know if you're going to have that. Are you going to put that in there or have that implemented?
It's a great question. It's kind of a silly question, but also not a silly question, because I was always struck, me in particular, I don't think a lot of other people cared that much, but I was always struck when I looked at the old stuff Satoshi was doing. It really seemed to me like Satoshi was very concerned that it would have the coin would not be useful for anything. So he was building poker, and he had like an eBay type thing and he had like a reputation score with like user review. He had all this wacky stuff.
Well, think about it, like around that same time, that's when all the fucking, poker stars and all that shit, they were in the spotlight for, offshore gambling and internet gambling with poker, and, recently being made illegal. So I can see, why he may have at least thought to put that in there. But I was just curious if that's something that you were going to,
I mean, if the really thought that was ingenious. And in fact, a lot of there's disproportionate number of the OG Bitcoiners are like poker players, because there was like Black Thursday or whatever. I don't remember the details, but like 2008 or something, like the US government like closed down all the payment rails or for all the poker sites.
Yeah. That's a lot of early Bitcoiners were fucked from playing online poker, like because of all the shit that was going on. So you can imagine how that could orange pill a poker player in that type of situation.
So maybe Satoshi was aware. If so, it just speaks to the eternal genius of Satoshi that he was like, oh, we can market it to the libertarian community. We can market it to like the Ron Paul revolution as digital gold, and we can market it to the poker. If so, then he was, just truly just adds one more category of genius to Satoshi. I think one thing that is interesting to just comment on is the casino or the DGen or whatever, all that stuff is reliably a huge source of money. So there was Satoshi Dice back in the day, and Satoshi Dice was responsible single-handedly for more than half of all there was a point in which it was responsible for most transactions and most of the transaction total fee revenues paid to Bitcoin miners.
Some of these people lost so much Bitcoin on Satoshi Dice. Oh man, be fun. I'm glad I'm not one of those people. I came a little bit after that. But
yeah, so there is a sense there's like this anchor thing, and apparently there was like casino.bitcoin.com, which was apparently making like hand over fist huge amounts of money. And it was run by libertarian Roger Ver, who was like, I'm not getting any permits or whatever. And then they sold it to the administration of the site got shifted around. I think probably still owns the domain, but like the administration of this, and they were like, oh, we don't want to operate a casino without a license. But some of this stuff is just reliably very, very, very likely to pull in fee-paying users. I'm not sure how else to phrase it. So I think that's worth reflecting on. That like this is like, it's like you play SimCity, and if you play the newer SimCities, they'll let you like put in like a toxic waste dump or like a prison or like a casino. You can put in all these like vices, and it will like make you money, but it makes no one want to live near the area.
It makes the area shitty. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So that's the kind of like, I always thought that was funny. I always really liked those games. So it's kind of like if you've got nothing, you could go for that. I wonder about that. My guess is that today, between GitHub and LLMs and everything, it would probably not be that much work to round off the poker game. And of course, I have lots of friends who.
Are you a poker player, Paul?
I have lots of friends who they love to play just casual poker online. Or in person.
Yeah, we have a nightly game. We it's funny just because like we play nightly, and we have Lightning based escrow that we pay into, and when we're done, the game pays out via Lightning. So pretty fun.
Yeah, so I don't know. Was it just one more aspect of the genius of Satoshi that he was like had his finger on that pulse, or whatever you want to call it?
There's something there for sure.
Yeah, there's something there. That's a good way of phrasing it.
I don't think Vlad's going to unblock Mr. Hodl, so you can get him on stage.
Maybe I should switch. Okay, because the reason
he commented that he left already, anyways.
Okay.
He didn't have anything valuable to say, anyways.
If you remove him as the
co-host, he definitely did not.
And get him back in.
No, Mr. Hodl had nothing valuable to say, and he's too busy at his
still would have been funny.
This is Paul's space, and Paul.
He would have had nothing valuable to say, but it would have been funny. And the whole point of it is let the haters. But yeah, I agree. And I forgot that about the co-host thing, and we could have swapped. But the reason why is, for some reason, it hasn't happened lately, but my phone will reliably I don't know, something happens with the spaces and the app crashes. And if I'm the only host and I don't have a co-host, the whole space will just go down. But if there's a co-host, it just switches to them, and then I can join back in. But it hasn't happened in a while. I guess they fixed the software a little bit. Whatever,
Yeah, so I guess just to go back to the I know you're not really small block or whatever. I get the whole take, but I'm just saying, like, so is there not like a balance between, like, let's say the poker example, right? Like, there's obviously a use case. Maybe there's a gambling drive chain that could make sense, but also now you have to support a whole new drive chain. Maybe that doesn't make sense, and maybe just people want to use the L1 because it's already supported, and you don't have to like have more infra to. Is that how this works? So with the drive chains, like if I start a drive chain, I need to run a whole new full node, and I need to have it all customized. It's basically a new Qt wallet, right?
Yeah, the drive chain is a new full node, new wallet. The thing is, though, what the drive chain is supposed to be a solution to the problem of disagreement, and we've seen the problem of disagreement like rear its ugly head a lot. And so the first big disagreement Well, honestly, there were many, but I don't know how much history you want. I'm going to try to go super fast here. Like, first there was Bitcoin, but then there was Namecoin, which people said, should there be a chain for doing DNS? And some people said yes, some people said no. And this is when Namecoin was invented and merge mining was invented. And then there was Litecoin, which said, oh, can we have the blocks be faster? And then people were like, that's kind of doesn't really achieve anything. And Litecoin was created. Then we had the block size war, which was like, should the blocks be small or large? And we also had like Ethereum type of a thing. Should there be, Turing complete scripts or whatever? I'm not sure how you would want to phrase that one, and then there was like privacy. So there was originally ZeroCoin, was a Bitcoin privacy project on BTC that became Zcash, the altcoin. Even after Bitcoin Cash split off of BTC, then they immediately started disagreeing again, and you had Bitcoin SV split off from BCH. And you
had Amari's dumbass make eCash off of BCH too.
Yes, exactly. So that's what I was getting at, is actually this problem of disagreement is, I think, really big. And so the idea is you would use the Drivechain L2 when the alternative is like this falling out or this like horrendous disagreement, like on a big scale. So that's the idea where this is supposed to be a huge improvement over that, which I hope that is.
So it's kind of the opposite of how I'm thinking then, because I'm thinking Drivechain first, and then if the Drivechain is like very successful long term, then that justifies putting some of that reasoning into the L1 as well, not the opposite. Like, you don't want to start it on L1 and then argue about it, in my mind, and then become a Drivechain, because I mean, maybe you do, I guess. I don't know. It just feels a little.
The arguments, they're sort of free. They just spawn, they come out of the mists, and people always have these arguments and disagreements. And so,
if let's say a Drivechain, the most useful Drivechain is like big block Drivechain. Let's just say that for
sure.
example, right? At what point is that not proof that the L1 needs to be more like that Drivechain? Like, where's the data going to show you that?
Well, sometimes it is a case of different strokes for different folks, right? Like, people want mutually incompatible things. So there's no sense in which one would be permanently better than the other. For example, when you want the large block, if you want abundant block space and cheap fees, but then you have expensive nodes, so it's kind of like a trade-off. And maybe some use cases are better on one chain and some use cases are better on a different chain. And there's no, I think there's a completely different sense in which you're absolutely right. There's actually at least 3 different senses, if I can maybe explain what I'm trying to think about right now, which is sometimes there's different strokes for different folks. Like, if you have Zcash privacy, that would be hard to justify to the 21 million, infinity divided by 21 million crowd, because it makes it harder to tell that you actually have 21 million coins. So sometimes they're incompatible. There's another case in which, you would do you could use one for R&D and experimental features, like we have like Bitcoin Inquisition, or we have like, Litecoin did SegWit before BTC did SegWit. And so then people said, well, hey, listen, there really can't be like some kind of catastrophic bug in SegWit because it's been on Litecoin. So there's one sense in which it's like a staging ground or like an R&D lab. You could say, we can do this on L2 with real money. And then we can, after it's been proven to work, proven to be safe or popular, it's less controversial to bring it to L1. There's a third and completely different sense, which is what has happened currently in the BTC world, which is that we've evolved into a cultural stasis. And everyone is afraid to stick their neck out and do anything unconventional because everyone who does is shouted down by people like Mr. Hodl, but he's hardly the only one. And the whole thing has become a self-reinforcing death spiral of stasis and basically like conformity and peer pressure, fear, lack of creativity. So that's a completely different thing that I think that happens periodically to just about every group. Like, every organization is sort of evolving towards decay and inefficiency all the time, and that's part of the issue we have right now, is that no one
But I
wants
mean,
to do
you've thought
anything.
about this a lot, right? So let's say we have BIPs on Bitcoin. We also obviously gonna have BIPs on eCash. But what's the system for like data mining this argument, in a sense that like BIPs are, sort of a long waving conversation, and we can see all the historical input and output. Like there has to be a system in my mind that's the BIPs for Drivechains to L1, in a sense, right? Like the Drivechain can prove something, but then it's still a political uphill battle against entrenched benefits of whoever has the money, whoever has the balance, that kind of thing. And I think that's what's happening with Bitcoin more than it's just this evolution thing. I think we're being pushed into this corner of no ability to develop the chain so that the Wall Streeters get a time to catch up. Like that's basically what I think is happening. And everything else is just detailed noise. So isn't that same thing going to happen in this situation where there's not really there's not a funnel for BIPs from other than arguing about it with humans and stuff all day long, which is the same issue we have on Bitcoin. The only difference here is I can run off and like segregate myself in the corner and do something regardless of anyone telling me no. And it's not its own island anymore like it used to be with altcoins, where you would fork Bitcoin and it would just be its own island. Like I forked Bitcoin in 2019 with some friends of mine. One of our devs passed away. It's still working today, right? It doesn't matter. Nobody uses it. Nobody mines it. It still works. But I'm off on an island in my own where nobody gives a shit about this chain. So obviously drive chains do help solve and start solving that problem. But let's say I prove something on my drive chain. What is now the pathway for me to take my evidence of the drive chain being a best performing market asset because of this feature and now go to the L1 and say, we want to help progress eCash or whatever. And we think we should add this to the L1. Like, what's the solution for everyone being retarded in that situation?
Well, it's difficult to have a solution for everyone being retarded. I think in part what I was talking about with the cult is we are doing it to ourselves in addition to maybe other people doing it to us. So I think everyone's doing it, including people are doing it to themselves, because like people want to fight it. Now, for example, it used to be uncontroversial to do soft fork activation. We used to do many of them, very, very many of them, multiple per year. And there was no controversy over it before the SegWit blockade. But now that it's become scarce, now everyone wants to fight over, who gets to do it next. So that now that you can only do one every 5 years, it becomes more prestigious, whoever can get theirs across. And this leads to enormous amounts of bickering and infighting among the different soft fork devs. And so they are kind of doing the work of the stasis death cult, maybe without realizing it. And similarly, there's all kinds of people who are saying they don't realize what the real problem is. So they just think, the problem is that actually none of the soft forks proposed are good enough. And if we just keep tinkering with it, and again, this is actually carrying water for the stasis cult. So I think if I had my way, like a trustworthy person, like a good rule of thumb would be, is this person going to like, it's kind of a bizarre thing to say, but this is the only way of making any sense of the situation is like, the jigsaw killer has strapped a device to your head that's going to rip off your head and kill you if no soft forks activate in 12 months. So if that, I listen to whatever that guy has to say, but everyone else is accidentally serving the stasis death cult. They may not even realize that they are, but I think that would be, I would listen to whoever that guy is, or, they've got the vest strapped to them. It's kind of because everyone else, it's very suspicious that they all just kind of shrug and move on with a kind of, and then you have many people. Udi, he was saying, when Opcat activates later this year with no controversy, I'll be accepting everyone's apology. He said that in 2024, at the beginning of the year.
And then he blocked the entire ordinal space, but yeah, go ahead.
And then we also had Moon Settler. He was doing L Enhance, and I asked him, I think it was the beginning of 2024, I said, well, what if we're still having this conversation 12 months from now? And he was like, that's such a horrible thought. I don't know what I would do. I would probably just quit Bitcoin. So that's exactly what happened with him. So you have a long list of people who think they understand the problem, but unless they're wearing the head ripping off device in 12 months, I'm not interested in what they have to say, because I don't think that they realize
well, as someone who's been wearing the head ripping device for 14 and a half years, these people aren't going to listen to that guy. But I feel your point. But what I'm getting at is I think you're almost there. But I also think you're kind of still not going to hit the mark necessarily, because like if you look at meta protocols as a good example, like you have the BRC20 system, it's dog shit, right? We all know it's dog shit. Then you have these other meta protocols that keep coming out on Bitcoin that are also dog shit, but they're at least forcing the L1 to adapt, right? They're forcing it. They're forcing the conversation. There's no political bullshit. It's just, are people going to pay the fees? And if they pay the fees, the data goes onto the chain and nobody else can say or do anything about it, since it's a third-party software that you can't stop us from using, you know? With your system, it almost seems like you're kind of leaning into the problem, but you're trying to like also address the problem. But you're going to let these people start these drive chains, and then we're going to get back to the exact same problem we have in Bitcoin, where there's not really a cross-chain BIP thing, you know, like a drive chain to main chain BIP system. And I think that's what we need, even though the BIP system isn't even that good at all in the first place. You can't just leave it to politics, because like the problem you're going to face, from what I understand, is that you're too honest with your understanding of the things. You're not playing the politics as much as everyone else is playing the politics. You're up against people who are playing politics all day long. So it's not necessarily a technological argument. It's more like, how do you organize humans so that this political gerrymandering bullshit doesn't happen every time we have to have a serious conversation? Because you're seeing it everywhere, in every chain, all these L2s, all the meta protocols, it's all the exact same thing playing out. Like, people just want to make money, and they're willing to throw everything else to the side and say whatever they need to say to make some money, which means that like this whole like, oh, let's just go with the trusted guy, it doesn't really work in this situation, because when it starts playing out and it takes too long, we get stupid shit like Lightning from our thought leaders. We get stupid shit for like SegWit from our thought leaders so we could support Lightning. And then we waste 6 years of development getting nowhere. And that is the problem. Like, you have to figure out a way with the drive chain system. Once there's a number one drive chain, that thing has to be held up high and say, look, this is proof of people paying for fees. We think that if we add these things to the L1, we're going to get more fee paying users. And that's all that should matter. All these fucking, everyone with an opinion on Twitter, irrelevant, completely irrelevant. Everyone down here, listeners, me as included, we're all irrelevant. We need to get away from talking to people and saying what people think on the internet. This is not going to get us anywhere. We need data, and we need to prove that transactions are being paid by people, which is the only way we should be developing the software going forward. Is if people are willing to pay more fees, we should do that thing to make sure that the fees are going to the miners, and et cetera, because otherwise we're going to get to the point where these guys are going to say, well, we're the political leaders around here, and we're going to inflate the supply of Bitcoin so that we can, pay the miners, or whatever else they're going to say. But they're just going to put that down our throats, and we're not going to have any mechanisms to fight it. And I think the thing you could be doing right now is going down that rabbit hole of how do we solve these cross-chain political problems, because that's the number one problem you're going to face, is these political infighting bullshit.
Okay, great. So I liked a lot of that. So first of all, I agree that the L1 fees, total L1 fee amount, that should be like partly like the North Star of anyone, like for Bitcoin Core, they should just be like everything in Bitcoin Core should revolve around making the exchange rate very high and also making the total L1 fee revenues very high. So I agree with that. I'm also a huge proponent of prediction markets, so I agree with you about conversations often overrated, and you have a lot of people with no skin in the game just saying whatever they want or just like performing for the camera, and that's a huge waste of time, or worse. So I agree with all that. One thing that I'm curious about is, why is it important for you, someone builds the L2 and it works really, really well, you can deposit to the L2 and withdraw, you have the same coin. So why is it so important to you that the feature come back to L1? Maybe there would be.
It's not always important, but sometimes it's going to be let's say it's scaling arguments, right? Like, there's going to be a point where you even hit a bottleneck, and you have to like weigh your community's input, right? And that's what happened with us. We obviously Bitcoin is not scalable. Did you rug? Did he rug? Hello? Oh, I can. Hello, I can see you. It just wasn't saying. So basically, obviously, Bitcoin is not scaled enough. If me, one user, can send $1,000 of transactions, and I can make everyone else pay 10x the fee rate just because I wasted $1,000 measly dollars, right? Clearly, that is not a good system where the auctioning, the RBFing of every transaction in a small, transaction hard-coded thing, 4,000 is the max you can really get in a block based on data size, right? And then on top of that, you have some blocks going up for 2 hours at a time. So in this situation, clearly we need to be having conversations to address this situation. But we've gotten to this, like you were saying, like stasis effect, where that is somehow not a problem. It's not a problem that users are waiting 2 hours to get a transaction approved. Like, that is insane to me that we have made that a thing. So like there needs to be a way to address that without this political side of it, to say, look, there is mathematical proof that the L2 could lend 50 or 10 or 20% of the fee payers back to L1, which gives everybody a better, technological playing ground to work within. And here's the reasoning for it. Here's the data for it. It's not just because Paul said so, right? Because like if we don't have systems like that, all you're ever going to get is Lightning networks in the future. You're never going to get anything other than the bankers are buying their way in. That's all you're ever going to get. And that's all Lightning network has been since day one, is a way for us to cuck to the banks, okay? So if you can understand that, then why would it not keep happening with new solutions down the road? Like, I think Drivechains are a decently good idea. I do think we start getting into the realm of let's not scale the L1 because we have L2s. And I really don't like this, like going all in to the one side of the game. Whether L1 or L2 is not good. We need to have a balanced system where one side is helping balance out the other side and vice versa, right? We don't need to scale BSV style, but we also need to recognize that 2-hour block fucking going, like it just can't be happening. There needs to be a better DAA. Go to LWMA, whatever you need to do. But the point is these things are important for users. We are losing to Solana because users can get onboarded to Solana in a single app. They can have finality in 10 seconds. And the dumb fucks in this space are cool with that. They think that's okay. Fuck Solana. They're all scammers, shitcoiners, whatever. Solana is the way people onboard to crypto nowadays. How is that okay by anybody in this space? I do not understand. But the point is the reason we got here is because there's no technical solutions to any of this. It's all just Twitter-based bullshit like this. So if you're going to deal with this problem, you're going to see a lot of these things coming and hitting you in the face. And you're going to say, man, it's okay. We just got to deal with it. But I don't think that's true. I think there's a way to have a BIP style system that says, hey, look at all the data on this drive chain. There's a good theory that based on, 5%, 1% of these transactions would come to the L1, which would increase the revenues for miners XYZ percentage. I think that kind of data is much more helpful than what does Paul think,
Okay.
That's all.
Again, I liked a lot of what you had to say. I think a lot of it made sense. I think this project is different from like when Vitalik created Ethereum, it was like, what does Vitalik think? Or even like for many years, I would ask like William Mugayar, remember him? I would be like, what will you do about such and such? And then he would be like, Vitalik has said he will solve it. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. So, but this is different than that. And because, first of all, the L1, when this project keeps the L1 the same as Bitcoin Core, and then a lot of the L2s, they have like their own, they have their own fate and their own life. And then you can add new L2s that have nothing to do with what I want or what I think. So I'm this is a new crypto project where you're not really betting on me running it in the future.
Well, let's just say I want to activate CAT on L1 or whatever it is, right? I'm not saying you're not going to do that or whatever. Let's just assume I want to do something. My drive chain is the best drive chain, and I am more popular than Paul in this, eCash scene now. Can I not use my political influence? And I see this every cycle on every single project when there's China versus the West, whatever. They always want to fight for a political influence, right? So let's say I'm powerful, rich, I'm CZ, I come to start a drive chain, I start Binance drive chain. How are you going to stop me from putting CAT into the L1?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's a big problem with CAT on L1. I think, okay, there's a couple different things because you've hit on like lots of different issues. Now it's almost 4 o'clock, so
Yeah, I'm going to keep you here all day. You're not going anywhere, Paul.
So you've hit on a lot of different issues.
Left.
Well, one is that I think there is a solution to get to your fundamental problem of politics. I think there is a different category of solution that does defeat politics to some extent, which is competition. And competition is variation and selection. And that is what the L2, the drive chain idea, tries to introduce a little of. Because you can say, hey, here's an L2 that doesn't have opcat. Here's one that's similar, but it does have opcat. Now people are building on that one. Users are coming to that one. And meanwhile, everyone else who's launching their new L2, they're going to look at that and think, well, how can I get people into my L2? I guess maybe I should have opcat here. So I think competition does work on keeping people in line. So I think that's a source of optimism. With respect to opcat specifically, that's a soft fork on L1. I'm a huge supporter of the soft fork. It might be the top.
Let's give an example. What are you not in favor of though? Like, let's say I want to do 64 megabyte blocks, and I'm Calvin Ayre, and I'm putting all the money into my drive chain to convince everyone that I have the most successful drive chain, and all I'm really doing is market making my own drive chains shitcoins, you know? But then I go to the L1 and I say, okay, I'm the most successful drive chain. I have 10, 20 times more users than everyone else. I've made us millions of dollars in fees, and I think that we should integrate this and that. And then I buy a bot army to argue with you on Twitter to say, and this is going to cost me $1,500, by the way, to tell you everything I'm saying, and you're going to feel overwhelmed by the community. And then all of a sudden it's going to be that guy has political, momentum over you, and you're being forced to argue with your community about things you don't agree with, regardless of the technicals, right? Like, that's what I'm saying is like, right. It's going to happen. It could even just be the exact scenario I just said, where CZ starts a drive chain and he wants to run your shit into the ground by market making it and taking over consensus type thing, right? So that's what I'm getting at. Is like the BIPs is the starting point, but it's not necessarily the final point, you know?
Part of the idea of the drive chain and of the L2s is that it's like a pressure release valve, and it gives people a little bit of what they want. So the idea, in the block size war, you had the large blockers who wanted larger block sizes. And they couldn't. They had ways of getting them, but they didn't really understand like how extension blocks worked and stuff at the time. They maybe still don't. But it was kind of like the only thing they could do was launch this big campaign in BTC to try to persuade people, which they ultimately were unsuccessful in doing. And then they launched BCH. But with part of my idea is that, well, now they would have this other thing where it's like, if they really disagree with you, they can just launch this L2, and then they can have the block size be whatever they want over there. And I think this is very helpful in a lot of different ways. One is it stops the community from splitting into hard fork, and the other is it stops annoying people from doing a big political campaign, and it also stops people from having to listen to the political campaign because they just think, well, we don't have to worry about this because this is so. Another thing, though, that I think it does is a lot of the people during the block size war, this includes me. This absolutely includes me. I was saying, listen, whatever you think about what the block size should be, the hard fork is actually a very dangerous tool. It's ironic that I'm using it now, but this is after 10 years of like patiently waiting. And trust me, it's important this time. But the hard fork is not like, if you do the hard fork, you'll be at a huge disadvantage because you have to launch your own new thing, et cetera, et cetera. So I was kind of saying, it's smarter to lean against Bitcoin Cash will have all this stigma associated with it because it's doing the hard fork, and it'll be on the new side. It won't be the old side. It won't be the status quo. So as a result of that, you have extra reasons to hate on the L2 or basically to expect it to fail. You have extra reasons to hate the new idea, large blocks will fail. It could have been, ZK snark privacy, or it could have been something else, ring signatures, whatever it is. Right. You hard fork, you're at a disadvantage. But however, in the drive chain world, I think now people might, hold their tongue a little bit because they might think, okay, such and such says this is a good idea. So let's just say ring signatures as an example. We live in the current world with no ring signatures. Someone says, oh, ring signatures are the best for L1 and for L2 and for everyone. Everyone's going to love this idea. Then you have like a Greg Maxwell or whatever on L1 who's saying, let's just not change L1. It's fine. Or Michael Saylor or whatever you want to call it. And now they have to worry, though. They have to think very carefully about how much they're going to criticize this whole ring signature thing, because what if it goes to the L2 and then it's a big success? Because they can't stop you from making a new L2, and they can't stop people from using it. And once you're on the L2, you can call the shots however you like. And when you do that, it might be a big success, and then their credibility is going to suffer.
No, I get that. That part makes sense.
So I think it actually is kind of a decent way of addressing all three categories of thing. Like, people may be open-minded to the changes because now you're not going to leave the BTC community. You're just going to start a new L2. This is the expected and encouraged way of disagreeing.
Okay, but I guess that's not really my point. I guess my point would be this. I guess since you only have a few minutes to go, I'll get it to the point, like a directly bullshit, right? So Drivechain, the whole point of you doing this is to prove that we should do this on Bitcoin, right?
Well, I think it's a little more nuanced than that, but I think that on one hand, this is a demonstration of what BTC should do. On the other hand, this is an insurance policy if BTC is like so screwed up that it won't do it even after the demonstration.
That's what we did in the big block camp. Like, we got so egotistical and prideful in our technical solution that we had that exact take at first. And then everybody, except for this dumb fucks like me who came back to Bitcoin because we understood that, you know, even if we lost the battle, we didn't lose the war. The dumb fucks who thought we lost the war that stayed in Bitcoin Cash only, like some of these people up here that think Bitcoin is dead and Bitcoin is worthless because of one technical mishap or whatever. Like, that's going to be the same problem the fallacy you guys fall into in a community. So where do we get to the point where, and this gets back to my earlier question about data, how do we prove, insurance policy or not, let's just throw that out the window for a second, how do we prove that when Drivechains go live and people start using it, that it's a good example to Bitcoin? Because I think that's what we all miss out on. Bitcoin Cash is a great example to Bitcoin in the sense that they don't need Mossad. They don't need fucking Blockstream to do all this. They just work on the bullshit themselves and people just use it. And that's fine. It doesn't need to be as successful as Bitcoin to be a success technically, right? But that's like what you're going to end up doing. You're going to end up saying, well, fuck it. We can't convince the Bitcoiners to do this because they're all dumb. So let's just focus on eCash, insurance policy attitude. But then I think you lost the war. You just gave up then.
I'm trying
So how do you prove it? How do you prove
it's difficult
that we should do this?
To follow the story a little bit, because to me, it's very clear that Bitcoin Cash did not make like a successful demonstration or anything that was like inspiring to the regular BTC people, which includes the small blockers, but also like neutral people. And in fact, I think my opinion of what happened is that the Bitcoin Cash failed so hard that it actually discredited the idea of the hard fork itself, like massively. And it also discredited the idea of like disagreeing with Bitcoin Core, and it discredited the idea of that miners have any role.
Though, right? Like it has today $240 million of 24-hour volume. It's at $9 billion market cap. How is that a failure?
You're talking about Bitcoin Cash?
Close to a failure. Yeah.
Bitcoin Cash and the BTC Lightning Network have achieved similar amounts of success.
True.
They commonly work. They work to some extent, but they are not like the big grand slam.
I mean, Bitcoin Cash gets like 1,000x more daily volume than Lightning, and wrapped Bitcoin on ETH gets 10x more volume than Lightning Network. Like, so I don't know. I would say
but
Bitcoin
of course
Cash
you can find. I mean, if you go to the Las Vegas conference, you can. And I've met all these people, and I tell them all that Lightning doesn't work, and it's a fake idea, and it's just Theranos, and it's in a death spiral.
It's the panopticon of digital surveillance is what it is. But
what they'll tell you is they'll say, well, hey, listen, me and my friend used it last week. And it worked just fine. So that's what I know. But that's my point is when I say Lightning Network doesn't work, or when I say Bitcoin Cash is a failure, I don't mean like it's 100% literally a failure every day in every endeavor. It's a completely successful software project in the fact that it has users and it has actual software that people run. So that's not what I mean. What I mean is Bitcoin Cash held itself up. You know what I'm talking about. This is the thing.
I'm just trying to get to the point that, like, how are you going to not
Bitcoin Cash
the same
people?
Problem?
The Lightning Network people and the Bitcoin Cash people in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, all those people said, my thing is how we're going to scale Bitcoin to the world.
Yep.
And that's not true.
I mean, I agree. There's a lot more nuance. The technicals are only like 50% of it at best,
I agree. There's an enormous amount of nuance.
So it's like, I guess the point is all this, so I can let you go. But how are you going to avoid all of this happening to eCash and stick with the plan of trying to help Bitcoin get better? Because from my understanding, insurance policy take or not, the only reason you would ever do something like this is to prove what you've been talking about, So like, with that being the case, how do you keep yourself in line with those goals versus becoming just eCash? Like, you don't want to be that would, in your words, would become a failure. Just like Bitcoin Cash, right? In that situation.
Exactly. No, if eCash is around and it is not the number one coin on CoinMarketCap, or it is not like something that's generally accepted as like the pre-staging ground, like for the number one coin, which would be like BTC, I guess. Those are the only two scenarios I would consider to be a success, or a third scenario that I would consider to be a success would be it works, it works so well that there's like this huge cultural revolution in BTC, and people finally, they come around to my way of thinking on a lot of different things, like we should do this off forks more frequently. They don't really have any risk. We need to prioritize transaction fees paid, which is a real measurable thing, and not all this other whatever. And we need to get rid of the naive ossificationists who they don't really know what they're talking about and have no way of sustainably ossifying anyway, and they don't even know what they're talking about. So if we cause a huge cultural revolution in BTC and we save BTC, that would be a success. If this project is like the official pre-BTC in the timeline, or if it replaces those would be, everything else would basically not be a success in my view. Although of course, the view could change, I suppose. But I think probably there's only one winning coin. There's only one QWERTY keyboard. And
how many years from now you think that one winning coin is kind of going to take, the forefront though? Like right now, Bitcoin's the one winning coin, right? So
yeah, I think like 2 years. I would wonder, like, am I just kidding myself? But I think you've seen just from the announcement, we're only like into week 3 of my announcement, and already an enormous number of things have shifted, and we barely even got started. And this is just the announcement of the fork, let alone the fork itself, when you have people actually being able to put their money where their mouth is. But I want to reiterate what I said about, I was trying to follow your story. Your story seemed to be something like, Bitcoin Cash tried this before, but it failed to inspire BTC. I'm telling you that my version of the story was that BCH, like, kind of was not a great idea and not great execution. It only further enshrined the mistaken errors in BTC.
Agreed, yeah.
And
I think
it gave them more credibility.
The problem is splitting, right? Like the way you're splitting right now in a non-dramatic way, that makes sense. But when we did the Bitcoin Cash split, and like even me, I can admit to being a dumbass at the day. I still believe in big blocks, not necessarily BSV style big blocks, but 8 megabytes would have no problem today. And anyone who says otherwise is a fucking retard, But the point is that I understand that there's way more than the technicals. There's way more than the block size. Block speed matters. All this other shit matters. Taproot, everything, transaction weights matter. Everything matters, right? But I think what we did wrong in the big blocks is we let them push us out. We let them make us the bad guys when all we wanted to do was have discussions about things, And then they forced us to make decisions and pick a side and fucking political this, political that, And I think that was the biggest sin of the Bitcoin Cash community, was falling into that corner, segregating themselves off of Bitcoin community, becoming their own thing, and never coming back to like the reason I'm in Ordinals as a quote big blocker is to force the fucking conversation again, is to make people use Bitcoin again and actually want to transact on the chain again. Everybody that doesn't want that is not a Bitcoiner. They are a statist fucking retard, right? So I think that's the point, is that like, they fucked up. They lost the goal, man. The Bitcoin Cash people, they have their own goal, but the only goal is to be right now. It's not even to be to show the way to the people or to better Bitcoin or any of that. It's just to be fucking right on Twitter these days, and that sucks, So like, as a person who was there from day one, I fought on the big block side the whole time. I kicked Amari's dumbass out of Bitcoin Cash. I had my life threatened multiple times in telegrams over having a take. Like, it's just like, that's the thing, that it brings everything down. And like, we need to get away from all of that. We need to probably block everyone that has a negative take on Twitter. And you need to figure out a way, or even just think about it. Don't even figure out a way, but just always have it in the back of your head that we need more data. We need more proof of the things that people are saying, and not just hearsay. And it can't just be like, well, look at the tech, look at the transaction data. That's enough. Like, it has to be more nuanced with research and, and guesstimates and things like that say like, hey, if this were to happen on L1, we would get 30% increased security because the fee rates would rise. This and that, like, that kind of conversation is never happening anymore. It's always, I like Adam back. I think he's Satoshi, and we can't have this. This is not a way to go about fixing things ever. So if it would be the best thing you can do out of Drivechains, in my opinion, is have some sort of protocols that help avoid the politics. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree, and thanks for your points. I'm gonna have to end it now, but I think I want to sneak in some last words, because the most important bizarre thing about the block size war is that if you guys, the large blockers, had done the mandatory extension block with JJ from Purse, and with 83% of the hash rate, you would have won, and you would have kicked out and it would be a completely different timeline. And who knows what other weird problems we would have had. Another thing is, it could have, people talked about at the time, should the large blockers do Drivechain, which had been proposed but not really fleshed out. That also, you would have easily been able to get that. So these are mysterious, because as we told the audience, there's a lot of nuance. There's an enormous amount of nuance to these points, which there is. So there's lots and lots of nuance. I do think part of the story is the large blockers rushed. They just assumed they would win. They rushed and lost, and then left everyone in a confused state. Definitely me, including me. So, but yeah, we can talk about this next week or any time. So thanks very much for everyone. If you're interested, we have a Telegram group. It's t.me/DC Insiders, but to deter spam, I set it up so that people have to pay a tiny amount of money. I got to fix that and shut that off to join, to just message and join. Or you can DM me. I'm pstorts, PSZTORC. I'm on Telegram. I'm not Truthcoin on Telegram. Or you can DM me here. We have a Telegram group. I'll be back next week at 2. Thanks a lot. I'll probably be taking notes on random, haters and their arguments or whatever.
Yeah. Also, Vlad, is he AFK? Stop blocking people, you loser. We need drama up in here. If we don't have no drama, there's no listeners, dude. What the hell?
Yeah, I think he may be AFK or asleep. I'm not sure of the time zones, but yeah, we'll fix that. It's a work in progress, and I think I'll probably also shift to. There'll also be I'll switch to Clubhouse every now and then, or I'll switch to whatever. We'll switch to a different time, or we can shift it around. We can change up the format. So that's what we're here for. So thanks a lot, everyone. We will post the recording. So thanks very much. eCash.com, layer2labs.com, drivechain.info. These are the sites. So thanks very much, and see everyone next week. Thanks to everyone who spoke and listened. So thanks a lot. Bye, everyone. See you next week.